and welcome to the PYRESWAP show, the only GameFi show that's also a DEX, that's also a DeFi project, that live streams 4 times a week just to bring value to you, the user base. You know, I realize maybe the one thing we do wrong is we allow people who don't have the token to tune into this live stream, because like the amount of value that we literally reach down deep into our bag of value and then dump right into your lap is just so absolutely immense. It's almost fiscally irresponsible that we don't charge money for this. But out of the goodness of my heart and my messianic mission and motivation to rescue the degen from themselves, I just can't stop. Guys, I have great news. We should legitimately be pumping out short form content in a week. Yeah, like legitimately within a week. I'm feeling good about a week. Yeah, I don't know if our first batch will be super viral, but we'll definitely be out of the garage on it. Does that make sense? Additionally, guys, the ambassador program I think is going to be a hit, because I don't know if you guys know this, but the GameFi narrative is creeping up right now. Do you guys know about a game called Off the Grid? Yeah, so the GameFi narrative is creeping up, and by the way, former President Trump, who some people know who that is, he supposedly is actually affiliated with an actual DeFi project, right? Thank you, Trigger, the Prometheus. Now, generally speaking, I would say that Donald Trump is famous enough that he can in fact create a narrative. Does that make sense? I would say that arguably that's how he won the presidency in 2016, right? Just like literally like a fire hose of narratives. Like every single day it was just like Twitter this. You guys remember that? Right? If anybody knows how Twitter works, right? But the point being is, right now, you have these 2 projects which are large projects, and they are arguably implying that there is an emerging space, an emerging theater, an emerging opportunity for a DeFi narrative and a GameFi narrative. So us being at the cross-section of DeFi and GameFi, cross-section, right? I think this is our fucking window. And so our Twitter ambassador program, you know, I expect that we probably need about 10 of these people, right? And we're really looking for people that have over 5,000 followers, legitimately. Like, they gotta have over 5,000. And, you know, we want to look at people that, if they are ambassadors, they're not ambassadors for trash projects. Does that make sense? So, like, so far, the people that I've been talking to, they've all met this criteria. They haven't just been back shilling a trash project. But most importantly, I don't know if you guys know this about persuasion and sales, but I want you guys to understand something. Sales, when done correctly, is a transfer of belief. And what I mean by this is that if you've ever dealt with a salesperson and this salesperson came off salesy, or they came off insincere, or they came off less than genuine, do you guys want to know why you were kind of irked by those people? They were being manipulative and not persuasive. Does that make sense to you guys? Does that make sense to you guys? Here, I'm just gonna ban this spammer here real quick. If you guys, actually, yeah, I'll ask my producer if he could. Anyways, they're being manipulative, not persuasive. And what this means by this is, when you're being manipulative, you're not telling the truth, or you're not saying what you actually believe. You're being insincere, you're being opaque, you're not being transparent, and that lack of sincerity is felt by the group of people you're addressing. Like, it's literally felt. And like, you can convey this through the internet, you can convey this through a camera that's 10 years old, on a tripod, on a set that's better than apparently most YouTuber sets, if that makes sense. If you're not like really being sincere, people are going to instinctively understand this. Yep, exactly. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if you've ever dealt with a salesperson like that, they were undertrained. And this applies to all communication, really. Like, persuasion or sales, or whether you're preaching something or anything like that. Like, if you're if you don't feel convicted about what you're saying, like that's going to resonate. Like that's going to be what you convey. That's going to be the energy that you transmit however you're transmitting, whether you're talking to someone face to face or whether you're talking to them through live stream. And to be clear, like PYRESWAP is too important of a project for us to just take a chunk of money and then just shot put it at somebody who says they're gonna shill us. Does that make sense? Do you guys get it? So for this ambassador program, I am going to have to, and I realize this, like really invest time in all of our ambassadors. Because like I want, like our ambassador program, we're not like doing this just for Genesis. Like our ambassadors are permanent. Like if you're an ambassador, you're an ambassador. Like that's like a permanent thing. Does that make sense? Because it's not just the fact that the tokens have the 100x potential at these TWAPs, but rather that PYRESWAP is designed so that there's always more ways to make money in the future. Does that make sense? Like I want there to always be so many options for making money inside the economy that I never have to worry about money leaving. Does that make sense? I don't need to prevent my user base from leaving. I'm always interested in leaving the door open so that money can always come in. Does that make sense? And that is what makes money stay in. Does that make sense? If you don't feel like if you don't make people feel like they're trapped or burdened. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that I hate adding transaction taxes to tokens. So you'll see that in a lot of these more Ponzi-nomical DeFi projects, they put this like sales tax on things. Do you guys know what I mean? Have you guys ever seen a token with sales tax applied? Yeah. And then like none of those have ever lasted, but people think that they're going to last. Does that make sense? Like the narrative compels it, but all it really means is that when it's time to exit, people just hate the token more. Does that make sense? Like they literally, like no matter what the price is, like you're in fact capping the potential that other people see in the project. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. So like you've never seen this like sales tax like idea ever like lead to sustainability. Do you guys know what I mean? It's like, oh, hey, yeah, we were just trying to like be coercive. It's like, okay, that didn't work, did it? Yeah, it didn't work. So point being here, like I am not, you know, we're not gonna have ambassadors really running around with PYRESWAP ambassador in their name, and then and Trigger, don't even start about that. But like, we're not gonna have that without them literally being, I guess, what you could consider installed with the belief and the understanding of how the project works. Does that make sense? Like our ambassadors need to be at the standard, right? Like we can't just have any jackass being our ambassador. Does that make sense to you guys? But like by the time that I spend the time to evangelize this, right, one-on-one with our ambassadors, maybe I'll put the ambassadors in a group eventually, they will do an adequate job of evangelizing it and being our ambassador. Does that make sense? This is how I, in fact, replicate and scale the efforts. Does that make sense? By creating more and more people who can truly grasp the intricacy and the robustness of the project, and then therefore, when they speak about the project, they're not being manipulative, they're being persuasive. Do you guys understand what I'm saying here? Right? Like our ambassadors can't just be a mercenary. Do you guys understand? Do you guys think that like Satoshi Nakamoto was paying people to shill it? No. Like you could mine it and make it, but like no, he had to just spend the time, right? He did pay for like some newsletters, right? So he got his original followership from being featured in newsletters, but like that wasn't exactly the same thing. Do you guys know what I mean? Like he paid for some ad space and original eyeballs, but yeah, it was mostly him just spending the time putting the ideas into more heads, if that makes sense. Anyways, yes, so I'm going to just keep doing this. I'm spending a lot of time doing this ambassador stuff. By the way, guys, Reddit training is still today, okay? So we're still doing Reddit training roughly after this live stream. So I will post that link in the PYRESWAP Discord in the general chat because we are still going to use Reddit, just to be clear. Reddit is clearly like an untapped theater, an untapped arena, and the type of user, the type of avatar on Reddit is clearly a fit for us as well. So like we're going to continue having a Reddit strategy, and we're going to have Reddit training. I'm going to try to figure out how to increase it to 4 times a week. Right now I'm doing this ambassador onboarding, and the ambassador onboarding takes a lot of time. So I might try to make ambassador onboarding happen first before I implement the Reddit strategy, but we're definitely going to be increasing awareness. So I think as far as AGAs go, right, as far as AGAs go, and do you guys know what AGAs mean? I don't think I'll ever do a live stream without asking people if they understand what I'm saying. I jump through concepts really fast, and then I have to create acronyms and vocabulary. So, yeah, do you guys understand what I mean? Who here can tell me what AGA stands for? And also, welcome to everybody watching on Twitter or Kick or Twitch or any of these other platforms we stream to. Okay. All right, that's enough of a gap for me to assume nobody understands what I'm saying. So AGAs mean awareness generating awareness generating activities. Yep. Thank you, Doc. Okay, so so the point being is we have these two major, I guess you could say, leverage points. These two major leverage points of Reddit and short form, but we're going to add effectively, we're going to add, so like Reddit, short form, but now we're also going to have ambassadors. Does that make sense? So having ambassadors is great because it allows us to more proactively leverage what we do on Twitter. By the way, guys, our Twitters are now going to use more of the accounts in the GPSE. So the Dibs Money Twitter and the Snowtomb Twitter and the 2-ohm, 3-ohm, Z-ohm Twitter, the 0x Senyarage Twitter. There's going to be more Twitter accounts that are going to be retweeting and tweeting about PYRESWAP. Retweeting mostly. I'm pretty sure retweeting is the right thing to do. Effectively speaking, like, that's we're just going to leverage what's already happening. Does that make sense? Like, having more ambassadors means more variegated eyeballs. It creates more thought leaders, and the only way that I can in fact create thought leaders is with an ambassador program. So I'm reaching into my Rolodex, by the way. So I'm going to, in the pursuit of ambassadors, I'm going to be reaching out to people that I haven't talked to in years, let's put it that way. But they do have significant reach. And it'll just require me to persuade. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Does that make sense? All right. Well, fantastic. So anyways, more ambassadors are coming. By the way, our first ambassador, Naldo, also known as Necessary Growth, I believe he made his first ambassador tweet, using one of our diagrams today. So that's a little milestone hit. That might be why some of the charts are up. Who knows? Anyways, as far as market sentiment goes, today, since yesterday was actually a federal holiday in the United States, it's almost like today is the real first day of the market week, and it looks like it's a neutral day. I'm not really sure why I should mention this, but it looks neutral on both CoinMarketCap and Alternative.me. So they're both like 48 and 45. So neutral, a little on the low side of neutral, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. I don't really know what else to talk about. There is, in fact, I was recently talking a lot about my theoretics, and you know, I realized that there's like a lot of stuff that kind of help build the understanding of why you should be bullish on PYRESWAP. And one of these things that I think that most people haven't really done in Web3 is like explain why does Bitcoin have value? And two, and then like why aren't there more dApps? Right? So I realized that in order to even convey, this is earlier today, I was having a long conversation with a possible ambassador for us, wink wink. I realized that like in order to really kind of like wrap your head around like why PYRESWAP is designed the way it is, you have to understand like why aren't there more dApps, and then like why does Bitcoin have value, and then even like why does Bitcoin sustain itself? Does that make sense? Like these three questions. Actually, let me add that second one. Right. So I think that these three questions like are critical conceptually to, I think, as like an introduction to Fideianism. Does that make sense? Does it? Does it? Okay. And do you guys feel like you understand what my answers are to these questions? You do? Okay. I think Dr. Mack, you've definitely sat through these like multiple times. I think that these Winner, you do know, huh? You know my answer to all three of these actually, or you've heard me talk about them. I know Dr. Mack has like personally heard me preach this like 11 times, so I would expect him to. But yeah, very, very interested to know, yeah, if you actually know what my whole spiels are here. Yeah, is there one of these that you don't think you've heard me explain before? And do you guys know? I think I'm going to explain these anyway. All right, guys? I think this is what I'm going to do today. We have, in fact, if we're going to make this an hour long, we got 40 more minutes, right? 40? Okay. So remember these questions. In fact, I'm going to write them down on my little notepad here. I'm writing, just give me a minute, okay? I can hear you guys like suffering from the silence from here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to erase this because now I have it written on my board. And I think these three cardinal questions, are definitely critical to understanding the first page of the Ethereum white paper, in my opinion. But the first part we're going to talk about is that why does Bitcoin have value? Now, the first thing we want to discuss here is the history. We're going to financial history. So there's two types of systems that I'm going to describe and write on the board. Okay. Money systems versus credit systems. Money systems versus credit systems. Which are older? Who here knows? Who here knows the answer? Are money systems or credit systems older? Like historically. Ooh, damn, you guys do listen to me. And do you know why, really? Like, do you guys know why? Because money systems, this requires like a certain fucking type of technology to show up, where you can create uniformity. Do you guys know what I mean? Like, so first of all, you need to create the idea of like fungibility and commodification. Does that make sense? Then you need to create like a system of like measuring that, right? So when you build coinage, you have to effectively create the parameters. Indeed, Sonic, yes. So we're not even, by the way, credit is older than barter. Yeah, credit is even older than barter. Because like barter only shows up as like the fucking, money is like the evolution of barter. Let's put it that way. Money is like the evolution of barter. But barter only shows up when you have the economic group gets big enough where you're required to do this. Does that make sense? So like barter shows up when markets show up effectively. But anyways, more on that later. But in theory, you could say it's always there. But regardless, credit systems are older. Credit, because money systems, like you're required to have the idea of like this instrument. Does that make sense? And the fact of the matter is that this is an abstract idea that really we pulled out of our imagination and invented, right? So credit systems, like what kind of tech does it need, right? First of all, you need engineering systems here. You need to have like measurements. Does that make sense? So like it's impossible to do this without like an engineering system, right? Does that make sense? Like you need to have like, okay, this is a standardized kilometer. This is a standardized kilogram, right? You guys get what I'm saying? You need measurements. You need the concept of like fungibility. Does that make sense? And then you need the idea of like, then you need the ability to like replicate it, like minting. Does that make sense? Now there was commodity money in the past. Some of it was like salt or seashells or gold and stuff like that. But like they still had the ability to like commodify them. Does that make sense to you guys? Like you still had the idea. Yeah, you still had the idea. You still had the idea of like how many rocks were worth how many rocks. Does that make sense? What is a real rock versus a fake rock? Make sense? So credit systems, by the way, do you guys know what the tech stack of a credit system needs? Tech stack of a credit system like can really just be human memory. Does that make sense? Credit systems can completely rely on just how you remember people. In fact, your reputation as a human being is literally like a credit score that is established, decentralized by just an aggregation of how people remember you. Do you guys understand this? So like your overall reputation is built based on how consistently you're remembered and what you are consistently remembered for. Yeah, indeed. The idea of social credit, I don't use that word social credit, Remus, because most people think of like this Chinese system where you get shunned for jaywalking or whatever. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's like a, okay, I'm not going to get into that, but yeah, like it's that idea. Does that make sense? It's that idea. It's a reputation system, right? Additionally, other things that are easier to create besides what I just described here, like you need like writing. Does that make sense? Writing, recording. Right? So writing and recording, by the way, those are older than money. Do you guys understand? Like the ability to just mark something, right? Because sometimes they would just like mark a stick. You would just like put a slash on a stick. Does that make sense? To just create a tally. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Yeah, stuff like that, right? So like basic credit, the most brutalistically simple ones are human memory. You can get into advanced credit with like writing and reading. And deliberately speaking, when you think about credit, like there's two components of credit. Who here knows the two components of credit, the two ingredients of it, if you will? The most fundamental and conceptual components that make up credit. If credit was a product, nope, Zonic, nope. That is more nope. That is too. You are nope. Nope, you guys are far away from the abstract and then the concrete. Nope, that's not it. Nope. Nope. It's more like how you establish the credit in the first place. So I'll explain this. When you talk about like a rating and a limit, like what are the things you use to establish that? Yeah. And then giver and taker, we're going, yeah, giver and taker, we're still, there you go, Zonic, thank you. History. And what's the other one? Activity, indeed. Activity and history. These are the two things that most fundamentally, most conceptually, most abstractively establish the idea of credit. Because credit is just a combination of history and activity. How do people get into forecasting? How do people like figure out how to chase a trend or make a prediction about somebody? Does that make sense? Zonic, I would much prefer a general chat of people just spamming wrong answers than nobody answering at all. So I agree. Yeah. Remus, I want you to know something. You cannot quickly Google that. You'll just end up with like Experian and like Credit Karma and like all those apps trying to get you to download their shit. Yeah, like you have to go deep. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to Google that, especially not in the ChatGPT era. They're gonna play some wrong ass shit too. And by the way, like the average stuff on the internet is not gonna be able to like, how do you conceptualize the early moments of credit? Like you have to go deep into like financial history, which is like its own niche of finance and history. Yeah, so it's extremely, you're not gonna find it on Google front page. Yeah, there's no real product to sell here, so like you're not gonna see SEO for it. Right? History and activity. So when you assign credit, when you want to give somebody like the benefit of the doubt, as it were, which somebody said trust, Winterhorse said trust, right? How does that trust established? How is that trust established? Like what's easier? Like what makes it easier to establish trust? Like what is it that turns a risk feeling into a trust feeling, right? Risk and trust. You guys remember that little terazu, right? History and activity are not a terazu, by the way. They are like components. You're like, what is it though? Yeah, exactly. And then of course, like, it's also consistency too. Communication definitely matters. It definitely matters, 100%. Yeah. Indeed, Pega, which is also history and activity. Yeah, because it's like, wait a minute. Do they owe other people money? Do they still owe me money? Does that make sense? Wait a minute. When I lent them money in the past, did they pay it back on time? Does that make sense to you guys? When they paid it back, did they pay it with enough interest to compensate me for my time loss? Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah. When a dog, for instance, you guys know how like traumatized dogs react to like when you pet them? Do you guys know how like shelter dogs, like they're traumatized, so like they don't like getting pet. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Do you guys know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, they're traumatized. Why? Like they have given a very low credit score to humans. Does that make sense? Like they're paranoid. They're like, they do not trust humans. Does that make sense? Yeah, wincing, yes. Yeah, wincing, flinching, all those things. Does that make sense? So it is like, again, well, perception, again, that definitely applies for sure. But like, that's what I mean. Like the dogs themselves are able to establish credit in their head. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, it's not a very advanced form of credit, but like, they just use their past trauma to figure out where the risk versus trust line is. Does that make sense? And they draw the line very close to themselves. Does that make sense? They don't take risks on humans. They feel risk averse to interacting with humans. Make sense to you guys? Anybody who's dealt with trauma kind of can end up with this type of response. Humans can too. I'm not going to get into unpacking that today, but you get what I'm saying here. So when we talk about this first question again, which why does Bitcoin have value? You totally can, CJ. Yeah. Yeah, history is not a political term. Like I would say any term can be a political term. Does that make sense? So like again, history is literally like you can just scroll back in this chat. That's also history. Yeah, so I'm going to explain to you how time works, CJ, at least on a linear level. You have something called the past, then you have the future, and you have this ambiguous nebulous line in the middle, which is referred to as the present. Okay? So history is really just referring to like the past in the sequence it went. Does that make sense? And it's mostly focused around activities. Yet, some of these histories are like geological history, like so you can think about like the formulation of the atmosphere and the planet and stuff like that. You can think about dinosaurs getting wiped out by a comet or whatever. You can think about, the Roman Empire, 2,000 years ago. You can think about that. Or you can just think about literally like the log of a Discord chat, right? Yeah. In fact, CJ, history is only activity. Yeah, like you don't really measure like inactivity. You just kind of like zoom past that part. So, yeah. CJ, again, I'm a better economist than every economist you've read combined. Yeah, I'm just going to say that objectively. And history will reflect that 100 years from now as well. Okay, does everyone else who actually has a fully functioning brain understand how history, past, the present, and future works? Okay. One of the best things that ever happened to me, because I was also a gifted student, is I went into a program called Navy Nuke. And what that meant was I was no longer the smartest person in the room. I was around a whole bunch of other geniuses. So I got the hubris whipped out of me because everybody would play dumb in order to catch you in something you were saying wrong. Does that make sense? So other people who didn't experience this, like gifted people that end up being underachievers later in life, they don't get this, so they end up kind of underperforming, and it's because they're so damn sure of themselves because they never actually met, like they were never actually put into an arena where like, oh hey, you're not that fucking smart. Does that make sense? They continue to think that they have the brain and nobody else does. But generally speaking, these people are almost unremarkable across the board. Like they will, like you can look at them as like game theory and they don't even understand, like they don't have the self-awareness of like where their shortcomings are. Yep. And generally speaking, they are also extremely sure of themselves and they don't self-scrutinize. Like they don't self-scrutinize out of ego as well. Like before a word comes out of my mouth, I've been scrutinizing myself for 2 years to make sure that I can stand up to scrutiny. Does that make sense? But other people don't have that same level of standard. So like they'll just kind of like vomit vitriol when they think they know what they're talking about. And like Web3 is filled with these people that are literally just correcting to like what their bias already tells them, but they're all weak and they will be wiped out, to be clear. Like you can never get away from the Darwinistic nature of existence. And if you don't know how to self-correct, you will be made obsolete, just like a dinosaur. Anyways, moving on. So credit, conceptually, is activity in history. Like, you don't really, if you're actually thinking of like the history of inactivity, it's difficult to assign credit. Does that make sense? sometimes having bad credit, like on a credit card, is worse than having no credit. Because with bad credit, you can still figure out how much risk can be assigned to somebody with bad credit. But somebody with no credit, it's like you have no data point at all. You can't map a trend. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah, I bet it is like medical school, doc. Yeah. So, I'm going to give you guys a little piece of history, and it's called, on Wikipedia, it is called the Kula ring. Have you guys ever heard me talk about the Kula ring before? Okay. So for those of you who don't know, the Kula ring was a ceremonial exchange conducted in the Milne Bay province of Papua New Guinea. So I want you guys to think of like the Polynesia area. Does that make sense? Do you guys know where Papua New Guinea is? So Papua New Guinea is like north of Australia, east of Indonesia. Kula ring. I'll write that out. Yeah. Kula ring. Remus, let me ask you this. If you, I know that you do have credit cards though, correct? And I'll tell you this, Remus, there's other forms of credit score. There's other forms of credit score besides the consumer credit scores. Like, so the IMF assigns credit scores to countries. Like, yeah, countries, credit score, IMF. It's not IMF, it's like some other group, but it's like they're associated. Yeah, list of countries by credit rating. So I'll just show you this. Standard and Poor, sorry, okay. So right here, you can see this map, you guys. Do you guys see it? So there's these other credit ratings, and it's just AAA going all the way down to like D. Okay, well, Remus, yeah, again, that might just be the regulatory climate you're in. Yeah. Does that make sense? Something called a credit score does not need to be officialized. Does that make sense? These credit scores I'm showing you here, these are not credit scores that would be assigned to an individual. Does that make sense? Like an American citizen cannot have like a BB plus credit score. They have a number, I think it's between like 380 and 880, something like that. I don't even know the range. Like I'm not actually a guy. Okay, thank you to whoever is showing up here on Kick. Thank you for that comment. I appreciate it. Yeah, so like it's quite possible that you don't use that same credit scoring system. It's possible that you are getting scored it's possible that you're getting scored on credit like in a way that's not even being made explicit to you. That's also possibly true. Like I'll be honest. Because like, does the bank have access to your transaction history, right? Like if you use a debit card, does the bank still see it, like what you're buying and like the frequency at which you pay things? There you go. Yeah, Remus. There you go. So you do have credit scores. Yeah, a blacklist sounds like a credit scoring system to me. Sounds very extreme. Anyways, I'm gonna go back to the Kula ring. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the Kula ring. So we talk about Bitcoin, right? And like, why does Bitcoin have value? I'm gonna get back to the Kula ring. Also known as the Kula exchange or the Kula ring is a ceremonial exchange system. Ceremonial exchange system, to be clear, that is legitimately what it is. And it was made famous by Bronisław Malinowski, considered the father of modern anthropology. Again, the father of modern anthropology is the one that described the Kula ring. So he used this test case to argue for the universality of rational decision making and the cultural nature of the object of their effort. So the way this works, by the way, I'm going to describe it. The Kula ring spans 18 island communities from an archipelago called Masim, including I guess I don't give a shit about the islands, and involves thousands of individuals. Again, so let's put it out here. thousands of individuals. Okay? Participants travel at times hundreds of miles by canoe in order to exchange cool valuables. Which consist of red shell disc necklaces. So again, we're talking about red necklaces that are made of shells, seashells, okay? That are traded to the north, okay? So there are red shell necklaces circulated to the north, right? Also known as the clockwise direction. And then white shell armbands that are traded in the counterclockwise direction. Do you guys understand this? So there's thousands of individuals that would exchange cool valuables that are in fact red shell necklaces, again, getting traded clockwise in this archipelago, and white shell armbands that are traded in the southern direction counterclockwise. If the opening gift was an armband, then the closing gift must be a necklace and vice versa. The exchange of cool valuables is also accompanied by the trade of other items, known as actual barter. Does that make sense? So first of all, Zonic, I want you to notice that the first thing they do a ceremonial exchange before they begin bartering. Do you guys understand this here? Can you guys see that? Here, I'm gonna highlight this. Participants travel at times. Okay. Participants travel at times hundreds of miles by canoe in order to exchange cool valuables, which consist of red shell disc necklaces that are traded to the north, circling the ring clockwise, and white shell armbands that are traded in the southern direction, counterclockwise. If the opening gift was an armband, then the closing gift must be a necklace and vice versa. The exchange of cool valuables is also accompanied by the trade in other items known as gimwali, which is barter. And do you guys understand this? Does everybody understand and can visualize at least this idea? Thousands of individuals. Okay. They literally travel hundreds of miles by canoe to do this first. Does that make sense? So the first thing they're doing, like, what is the point of these valuables? I want you guys to understand. Like, all cool valuables are non-use items, traded purely for purposes of enhancing one's social status and prestige. Carefully prescribed are in the ceremonies, blah, 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 blah. Ideally, lifelong relationships between the exchange parties. The act of giving is display of the greatness of the giver, accompanied by the act of modesty. Okay? And the value of what is given actively played down. Okay? Such a partnership involves strong mutual obligations with hospitality, protection, and assistance. Does that make sense? So according to the Muyu, a good cool relationship should be like a marriage. So like effectively like this, the saying around Papua is once in the kula, always in the kula. Once in the kula, always in the kula. Okay? Okay, so how does that go again? People are literally trading non-use items. They're trading like knickknacks. Do you guys understand? They literally have all of these armbands and necklaces. They don't even wear them all, to be clear. Like the average person who's trading, they have like dozens of these things. Does that make sense? And the reason they have dozens of these things is because they can't get caught without one. Do you guys understand? Like you need to have a white one in case someone brings a red one. Does that make sense? And you need to have a red one in case somebody brings a white one. Because your neighbor to the north is not going to bring you the same thing that your neighbor to the south is going to bring you. Am I making sense to you guys? Right? So again, these items themselves, like they're not really getting any use from them. They are just in fact making these symbolic exchanges. Exactly, Remus. Exactly. Right? So the point being here is that the cooler ring was a credit system. Remus, that's exactly correct, Remus. The cooler ring is the first proof of work system. Does that make sense? It is the first proof of work system. And this is why Bitcoin has value. Because Bitcoin is in fact a credit system. It uses a ledger to track activity in history. Does that make sense? Like, how do these coins end up in existence in the first place? Well, Remus, just like the Cool of Valuables, somebody had to gather the seashells and make them, and then somebody else had to fucking transport them, possibly hundreds of miles by fucking canoe. Which, I mean, I don't know, that doesn't sound enticing to me at all. Does that make sense? So, like, the same way that fucking happened, yeah, exactly. There's a cost. There's a cost associated with it. And the difficulty matters as well. Because if there was not difficulty, there would not be any value. Does that make sense? Like, people need to kind of have an agreement on like what the effort required to make the journey is, right? So whether it's the amount of the amount of work needed to solve a block equation, or whether it's the amount of miles traveled by canoe, like the effort applied, right, is something that deserves recognition. So people trade these valuables, right, like when they're just making these trading partners, and this effectively is that sign of trust. This is a sign of trust that comes first, which then preempts the barter that comes afterwards. Does that make sense to you guys? So the Cooler Ring is an example of the first proof of work system that ends up creating like this credit system that everybody who participates in understands, even if they don't know each other. Again, thousands of individuals. Do you guys remember that? Would you guys not agree that crypto also involves thousands of individuals? Well, really millions, I guess, but yeah, you get what I'm saying. Yeah, at least thousands. Yeah. Anyways, okay, I think I did a good job answering that first question. Let's see. We've got about like 12 more minutes. I don't do enough talking about the Cooler Ring, but I guess it's not really super important all the times. And then of course, why does Bitcoin self-sustain, right? So Bitcoin self-sustaining involves the intergame. The intergame is way too long for me to actually explain in 12 minutes, but anyways, let's see. I think that's like the majority of me for explaining that right now. Let's see. Generally speaking, I guess going back to like the general like progress update. Yeah, it's about mobilizing more AGAs. Make sense to you guys? Okay, fantastic. Does anybody have any questions? Because I'm really going to get right back to work. Like, I really feel like I'm just going to jump back into work now. There's Reddit training. Yeah, thanks. Hey, me too, Remus. There's going to be Reddit training in 1 hour or so. Or, yeah, about 1 hour. 55 minutes. 55 minutes now. From now, there's going to be Reddit training. If you guys like to attend that, that'd be phenomenal. I liked it before when you guys were just spamming wrong answers. But okay. All right. Well, yeah, all right. I want to thank everybody for coming to this PYRESWAP show. We'll wrap it up here. And I'll post a link for Reddit training in the general chat here shortly. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow.